What if I told you that some of the most common foods sitting in your kitchen right now, foods you trust, foods you grew up with, foods you might have had for breakfast this very morning, are quietly accelerating the aging of your brain? Not in some vague, distant, theoretical way. I mean actively, measurably speeding up the process of cognitive decline, stealing your memory, dimming your sharpness, pulling the person you are, slowly, out of reach. I know that sounds alarming. And I want you to sit with that for just a moment, because what I'm about to share with you today is not designed to scare you. It's designed to arm you, because the science is clear, and you deserve to know what it says. I'm Dr. Robert Hayes. I've been practicing medicine for close to 30 years. I'm a physician who has dedicated a significant portion of my career to studying the connection between lifestyle, nutrition, and brain health. And I can tell you with absolute confidence that nothing I've seen in my years of clinical practice has made me more concerned, and at the same time more hopeful, than what the research now tells us about the relationship between what we eat and how our brains age. In nearly 3 decades of sitting across from patients, I have watched people lose themselves, not to a single catastrophic event, but to a slow, invisible erosion. A name forgotten here, a conversation lost there, a face that used to feel familiar going blank. And time after time, when we look closely at what those patients were putting on their plates, we find the same patterns, the same culprits, the same silent poisons hiding in plain sight. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what those foods are. I've put together a list of 5 of the most dangerous foods for brain aging that I've encountered throughout my career. And every single one of them looks completely harmless on the surface. Some of them are even marketed as good for you. That's what makes this so important. And the window to act isn't as wide as you might think. Because the damage, in most cases, begins long before you ever notice a single symptom. So, stay with me. What I'm about to share could genuinely be one of the most important things you'll hear all year. Your brain is the most extraordinary organ in your body. It never clocks out. While you sleep, while you rest, while you sit on the couch watching television, your brain is at work, consolidating memories, regulating your hormones, maintaining your personality, keeping your heart beating and your lungs breathing. It is you, in a very real sense, and it is unbelievably demanding. The brain represents roughly 2 to 4% of your body weight, yet it consumes around 20% of the oxygen you breathe and nearly half of the glucose in your bloodstream at any given moment. It is a workhorse, and like any workhorse, what you feed it matters enormously. Here's what makes the brain uniquely vulnerable and why this conversation is so urgent. When your heart is in trouble, it usually tells you pain in your chest, shortness of breath. You know something is wrong. But when your brain starts to deteriorate, when the slow leak begins, it goes quiet. That silence is not peace. That silence is danger. Because neurodegeneration is exactly like a slow leak in the roof of your house. By the time you notice the water stains on the ceiling, by the time the plaster starts to fall, the damage has been accumulating for years, decades even. I've seen this in my practice again and again. A patient comes in, concerned about memory. We talk, we test, and I ask them, "How long has this been going on?" And the answer is almost always some version of the same thing. "I don't know. I didn't notice anything until recently." That's the cruelty of this process. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps. And the foods I'm going to tell you about today are some of the primary accelerants of that creep. Now here's something I want you to understand before we get into the list. As we age, the brain becomes more vulnerable, not less. Think of it like the engine of a car with high mileage. When that engine is new, it can handle cheap fuel. It compensates. It pushes through. But the older that engine gets, the more sensitive it becomes to what you put in. The more damage accumulates, the harder it is to bounce back. After 50, after 60, after 70. The choices you make at the dinner table carry more weight than they ever did when you were young. And this is compounded by three biological hammers that just keep swinging as we age: chronic low-grade inflammation, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance. These three forces, working together over time, are behind the vast majority of the cognitive decline I see in my office. And every food on this list today accelerates at least one, and in some cases all three, of these mechanisms. I've put together 5 foods that I consider the most dangerous brain agers I've seen in nearly 30 years of practice. Some of them will surprise you. Some of them will make you think. And every single one of them, I promise you, looks completely harmless on the surface. Let's begin. Food number 4 on this list is one that surprises almost everyone when I bring it up in my office. I'm talking about refined vegetable oils and artificial trans fats. The kind found in processed snack foods, commercially baked goods, fast food, microwave popcorn, and many margarines. You probably don't think of oil as a brain threat. Most people don't. That's exactly why it's on this list. Here's the popular belief I need to tear apart first. For decades, we were told that vegetable oils were the healthy option, that they were heart-smart, that they were the modern scientific alternative to saturated fat. The food industry spent billions of dollars embedding that idea into public consciousness. And folks, that idea has cost us enormously, not just in terms of cardiovascular disease, but in terms of what it has done to our brains. I want you to picture something. Imagine the walls of every single cell in your brain, not just the outer membrane. I mean every neuron, every connection, every synapse. Those walls are made primarily of fat. They need to be flexible, fluid, dynamic, able to let signals in and out with precision and speed. Now imagine that instead of the healthy fats those walls are designed to be built from, you've been unknowingly substituting in a cheaper, industrial-grade imitation. That's what artificial trans fats do. They get incorporated into the very structure of your brain cells, and they make those walls rigid, stiff, slow, like trying to send a text message through a phone with a cracked screen. The science on this is striking. Research out of the University of California, San Diego, found that higher dietary trans fat consumption was significantly associated with worse memory performance, even in younger adults. We're talking about fewer words recalled, slower processing, reduced cognitive function. And this was measurable, quantifiable, dose-dependent. More trans fat in the diet, worse memory performance, period. And that's before we even get into the longer-term effects. Here's what these fats are doing inside your brain, and I want you to really hear this. First, they promote what I call the oxidative storm, generating reactive oxygen species, damaging neurons, attacking the very infrastructure of your cognitive function. Second, they trigger the inflammation fire, activating microglia, your brain's resident immune cells, into a chronic inflammatory state that slowly erodes neural tissue. Third, they perform what I call the omega robbery. They actually interfere with your body's ability to produce and use omega-3 fatty acids, which are the foundational building blocks of healthy brain tissue. You eat trans fats, you block the good stuff. Fourth, they corrupt the membrane, altering the fluidity of neuron walls, impairing the speed and accuracy of signal transmission throughout your brain. And fifth, they sabotage serotonin. Studies suggest high trans fat intake may reduce serotonin production in the brain, contributing to depression, anxiety, and mood dysregulation. So what do we do about it? Here's the good news, because there is always good news. First, read your labels. Look for the words partially hydrogenated oil anywhere on an ingredient list. That is trans fat. That is the enemy. If you see those words, put it back on the shelf. Second, shift your cooking fats. Extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil. These are your allies. Cook with them. Use them liberally. Third, eliminate commercially fried foods from your regular rotation. That means fast food, fried snacks, commercially prepared baked goods. Fourth, replace processed snacks with whole food alternatives, nuts, seeds, avocado, olives. Fifth, if you have margarine in your refrigerator right now, I want you to consider replacing it with real butter or a high-quality plant-based fat. Your brain will thank you. Write this down. The fat inside your brain cells was built from the fat on your plate. Choose wisely. Food number 3 on this list is one that carries enormous social weight in this country. And that's exactly why I need to talk about it directly and honestly. I'm talking about alcohol. Now listen, I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of people. I know it's woven into celebrations, into weekends, into the culture of socializing, and I want to be fair and accurate with you because that's what you deserve. But what the science is now telling us about alcohol and the brain is impossible to ignore. The myth I want to dismantle here is the idea that moderate drinking is harmless, or even good for you. For years, certain studies suggested that a glass of wine here and there might actually be protective. And I've had hundreds of patients cite that to me over the years. But doctor, isn't red wine good for the heart? My friend, let me tell you what the more recent, more rigorous science says. A landmark 30-year study out of the United Kingdom, following civil servants, many of whom drank within what would have been considered perfectly moderate limits, found that higher alcohol intake was associated with measurable shrinkage of the hippocampus. That's the part of your brain responsible for forming new memories. And none of those participants were alcohol dependent. These were ordinary people, drinking what many of us would consider normal amounts. I want you to picture a sponge, a healthy, full, porous sponge. That's your brain at its best, rich in gray matter, dense with connections, full of life. Now imagine that sponge, slowly, over years, drying out, shrinking, losing volume. That is, quite literally, what chronic alcohol exposure does to brain tissue. Studies have confirmed actual measurable reductions in gray matter and white matter volume in individuals with higher alcohol consumption. And here's what is most alarming. This relationship appears to be linear. More alcohol, more shrinkage, even at levels most people would call moderate. Here's the mechanism, and I want to give you the science without the jargon. Alcohol converts in the body to a chemical called acetaldehyde. And I want you to know something about acetaldehyde. It is one carbon atom away from formaldehyde, the chemical used to preserve dead tissue. When it reaches your brain, it damages proteins, attacks DNA, and essentially begins a slow pickling process of neural tissue. On top of that, alcohol triggers chronic neuroinflammation by activating microglial cells. It promotes oxidative stress. It impairs neurogenesis, the process by which your brain generates new neurons throughout life. And recent genetic studies involving more than 500,000 people have confirmed that higher alcohol consumption is linked to shorter telomeres, the protective caps on your DNA that are a direct marker of biological aging. The 5 attacks of alcohol on the brain are these. Direct neurotoxicity. Alcohol kills brain cells and damages DNA. The acetaldehyde assault, that near-formaldehyde compound, corroding proteins in your neural tissue. The inflammation cascade. Microglia activation triggering chronic brain inflammation. The neurogenesis block. Alcohol suppresses the birth of new brain cells in the hippocampus. And the telomere erosion. Accelerating biological aging at the cellular level. What can you do? First, if you drink, be honest with yourself about how much. Not what you tell your doctor. What the reality is. Second, consider a meaningful reduction. Even cutting back by half has been shown to begin reversing some of the damage, particularly in the earlier stages. Third, if you choose to drink, keep it to 1 drink or fewer on any given occasion, and give your brain multiple consecutive alcohol-free days each week. Fourth, replace evening alcohol rituals with brain-friendly alternatives. Sparkling water, herbal teas, non-alcoholic options that still feel like a ritual. Fifth, Support your brain's recovery with nutrients that counteract alcohol's damage. B vitamins, particularly B1 and B12, omega-3 fatty acids, and antioxidant-rich foods. Write this down. Your brain doesn't bounce back from alcohol as easily at 60 as it did at 25. The older the engine, the more expensive the fuel. Now, before we get to the top 2 items on this list, I want to ask you something. If this video is already changing the way you think about your brain and your diet, would you consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell? There are more conversations like this one coming, and I don't want you to miss them. Every video I make is designed to give you the tools to protect what matters most. Food number 2 on this list is, in my opinion, the most underestimated enemy in this entire conversation. It doesn't have the flashy reputation of sugar. It doesn't carry the social baggage of alcohol. Most people have genuinely never thought of it as a threat at all. I'm talking about ultra-processed foods, the packaged, industrially manufactured, hyper-palatable products that now make up a staggering portion of the average American diet. The chips, the frozen meals, the drive-thru, the snack cakes, the processed deli meats, the sugary cereals, the flavored crackers, the boxed, bagged, shrink-wrapped products that line entire aisles of every grocery store in this country. Here's the myth. If it's on the shelf, if it's FDA approved, if millions of people eat it every day, it must be safe. Folks, safety and optimization are not the same thing. Something can be safe in the sense that it won't kill you today, and still be quietly dismantling your brain over a period of years. Think of ultra-processed food like this. Imagine your brain as a garden, a rich, living ecosystem that needs clean water, good soil, sunlight, and the right nutrients to thrive. Now imagine that instead of tending that garden, you're pouring chemical cocktails into the soil every single day. Not enough to kill the plants overnight, but enough that, season after season, the soil becomes depleted. The roots weaken, the garden gets smaller. That is what ultra-processed foods are doing to the neurological environment of your brain. The research here is alarming, and it is very recent. A study from the Framingham Heart Study, one of the most respected longitudinal research projects in cardiovascular and brain health, found that among middle-aged adults, every single daily serving of ultra-processed food was associated with a 13% increase in the risk of Alzheimer's disease. 13% per serving. And consuming 10 or more servings per day, which is easy to do when you consider that a can of soda, a bag of chips, a processed meat sandwich, and a packaged dessert can get you there before dinner, was associated with a nearly 3-fold increase in Alzheimer's risk. A meta-analysis of over 800,000 people found that high ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a 44% increased risk of dementia. These numbers are staggering. Here are the 5 attacks that ultra-processed foods mount against your brain. The chemical invasion. Ultra-processed foods contain artificial additives, preservatives, colorings, and flavor enhancers that research suggests may directly damage neural tissue and promote the production of amyloid, the toxic protein that builds up in Alzheimer's disease. The inflammation. Inferno. These foods are the primary dietary driver of chronic systemic inflammation, which is increasingly recognized as a central mechanism in neurodegeneration. The gut-brain betrayal. Ultra-processed foods devastate the gut microbiome, reducing beneficial bacteria that produce neuroprotective compounds and replacing them with pro-inflammatory strains. Since the gut and brain are in constant communication, this is a direct attack on cognition. The nutrient famine. These foods are energy-dense but nutritionally hollow, crowding out the vitamins, minerals, omega-3 fatty acids, and antioxidants your brain desperately needs. And the vascular siege, their high sodium and refined fat content, promotes hypertension and reduced cerebral blood flow, choking the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to your neurons. Here's what you can do, starting right now. First, apply what I call the 5-ingredient rule. If a food product has more than 5 ingredients, and if you can't pronounce most of them, put it back. Second, shift to a predominantly whole food diet. Vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, seeds, whole grains, fish, eggs, foods that come from the earth, not from a factory. Third, begin replacing one ultra-processed food per week with a whole food alternative. Not all at once, one swap at a time. Fourth, pay particular attention to processed meats. The research is especially consistent and alarming on this category. Hot dogs, deli meats, sausages. These should be treats, not staples. Fifth, get comfortable in your kitchen. Cooking your own food, even simply, is one of the most powerful acts of brain protection you can perform. Write this down. Every ultra-processed food you eat is a vote against the version of yourself you want to be at 70, at 80, at 90. Now, item number 1. I've been building to this, and I need you to take a breath and really hear what I'm about to say. Because this one is everywhere. It's in foods you love. It's deeply woven into your habits. It's been marketed to you since before you could walk. It hides under dozens of different names on ingredient labels. And the science, connecting it to brain aging and Alzheimer's disease, is some of the most consistent, most compelling, most heartbreaking research I have ever reviewed in 30 years of medicine. Food number 1, the single most dangerous food for the aging brain, is added sugar and refined carbohydrates. White bread, white rice, pastries, cookies, candy, sodas, fruit juices, energy drinks, sweetened yogurts, sugary cereals. The sweet, refined, processed carbohydrates that flood the bloodstream with glucose and drive insulin to its limits. This is the bomb. This is the one. In nearly 30 years of medicine, I can tell you with absolute certainty that no single dietary factor has a more well-documented, more mechanistically understood, more terrifyingly consistent relationship with the accelerated aging and degeneration of the human brain than chronic excess sugar consumption. And I say this not to punish you. I say it because you deserve the truth. Let me give you the numbers first, because they are sobering. A study from Rush University Medical Center followed nearly 800 people for over 7 years and found that those in the highest tier of total sugar consumption were more than twice as likely to develop dementia. More than twice. Another study involving over 200,000 participants confirmed that high-sugar dietary patterns were significantly linked to increased dementia and Alzheimer's risk. And research consistently shows that high-carbohydrate diets are associated with up to an 89% higher risk of mild cognitive impairment in older adults. Now let me explain why. Because I don't just want you to fear sugar. I want you to understand what it actually does inside your brain. Because when you understand the mechanism, the motivation to change becomes something deeper than fear. It becomes wisdom. Picture this. Your brain cells, your neurons, require insulin to absorb glucose for energy. That's normal. That's how the system is supposed to work. Now picture what happens when, year after year, you flood your bloodstream with sugar. Spike after spike after spike. Your cells become desensitized to insulin, what we call insulin resistance. And this doesn't just happen in your muscles and your fat cells. It happens in your brain. Your neurons stop responding efficiently to insulin. And when that happens, even when your blood sugar is high, your brain cells begin to starve. They can't access the fuel they need. And neurons that are starving don't function. And neurons that don't function die. This is so consistent and so specific that many researchers now refer to Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes. The brain insulin resistance underlying the cognitive decline of Alzheimer's is, in many cases, the direct downstream consequence of a lifetime of excess sugar and refined carbohydrates. Let that sit for a moment. Here are the 5 attacks that sugar launches against your brain. The first is what I call brain starvation. the insulin resistance cascade that literally prevents your neurons from accessing energy, even when fuel is available. The second is the inflammation fire. Sugar is among the most potent dietary triggers of systemic inflammation, and chronic neuroinflammation is now considered one of the primary drivers of Alzheimer's pathology. The third is the amyloid factory. Excess sugar promotes the production and accumulation of amyloid beta plaques, the toxic protein deposits that characterize Alzheimer's disease. Research in animal models shows that refined sugar diets dramatically accelerate amyloid deposition in the brain. The fourth is age damage. And I don't mean age as in years. AGES stands for Advanced Glycation End Products. Toxic compounds formed when sugar reacts with proteins in your body, including proteins in your brain's blood vessels. These compounds cause oxidative damage, inflammation, and direct structural harm to neural tissue. And the fifth is the BDNF collapse. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which I call brain fertilizer. It's the chemical your brain uses to grow new connections, form memories, and protect existing neurons. Studies consistently show that high sugar diets dramatically reduce BDNF levels in the hippocampus, essentially cutting off the fertilizer supply to the garden of your memory. Picture what happens when you melt sugar in a pan. The clear crystalline substance transforms. It caramelizes, it turns hard, it coats the pan, sticks to everything, becomes difficult to remove. Now picture that same process happening, slowly, over years, inside the intricate, delicate machinery of your brain. That is what chronic sugar exposure does. And here's what I need you to know. This process can begin in your 40s, in your 30s even. The damage that manifests as dementia in your 70s often had its roots decades earlier. I've sat across from patients whose cognitive decline was well advanced by the time they came to me, and I've listened to them describe a lifetime of sweet teas, daily sodas, breakfast pastries, and late-night desserts. And I have thought, if only we had had this conversation 20 years ago. Now, I want to tell you something important. Every time you say no to the extra sweetener in your coffee, every time you choose a whole grain over white bread, every time you opt for fruit over a packaged dessert, you are actively, measurably protecting the version of yourself that will be alive in 20 years. You are investing in the person who will still recognize their grandchildren, still carry the full weight of their own story. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Now listen, I know we've covered a lot of ground today, and I understand if it feels overwhelming. 5 foods, 5 sets of mechanisms, a lot of science to absorb. I want you to know that feeling is completely normal, and I want to acknowledge something before we move on. The foods on this list are not obscure. They're not things most people would ever think to question. They are the fabric of the food environment that most of us grew up in. This isn't about blame. This is about clarity. And clarity is the beginning of change. But here is the genuinely good news. Because there is good news, and it is real, and it is backed by the same quality of science that gave us this warning in the first place. The research tells us that dietary changes, even modest, consistent ones, can meaningfully alter the trajectory of brain aging. A study that tracked participants over nearly 7 decades found that better dietary quality at every stage of life was associated with significantly better cognitive outcomes in old age. Participants who ate more vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains, and less refined sugar and processed food, consistently maintained higher cognitive function as they aged. And when researchers looked at people who replaced just 10% of their ultra-processed food intake with minimally processed alternatives, they found a 17 to 22% reduction in dementia risk. That's not a small number. That is a meaningful, achievable, life-changing shift. The brain is remarkably resilient when you give it what it needs. And the 5-step plan I'm going to give you now is built on exactly that principle. Not deprivation, not perfection, but consistent, purposeful nourishment. Step 1. Start with the swap. This week, Identify one high-sugar food you consume daily or near daily, a soda, a sweetened coffee drink, a breakfast pastry, and replace it with a whole food alternative. One swap. That's it to start. Step 2. Rebuild your fat foundation. Remove trans fats and processed vegetable oils from your cooking. Replace them with extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, or grass-fed butter. Give your brain the raw material it needs to build healthy cell membranes. Step 3. Crowd out the processed with the whole. You don't have to eliminate everything at once, but every time you add a serving of leafy greens, a handful of walnuts, a piece of wild-caught salmon, a cup of blueberries, you are displacing something harmful and replacing it with something powerful. Step 4. Reassess your relationship with alcohol. Not necessarily eliminate, but be honest, be intentional, and give your brain the alcohol-free windows it needs to recover and regenerate. Step 5. Protect your gut to protect your brain. Fermented foods, plain yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, feed the beneficial bacteria that produce neuroprotective compounds. Your gut and your brain are in constant conversation. Make sure that conversation is a healthy one. Breaking free from the foods on this list isn't punishment. It isn't restriction. It is the single most powerful investment you can make in the quality of the years ahead of you. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I'm grateful you stayed with me through all of it. We talked about refined oils and trans fats, the membrane corruptors that hijack the very structure of your brain cells. We talked about alcohol, the silent shrinker that takes the hippocampus, piece by piece, while the world tells you it's perfectly normal to have a drink every night. We talked about ultra-processed foods, the chemical invasion that starves your brain of nutrients while feeding it inflammation. We talked about sugar and refined carbohydrates, the brain's most insidious enemy, the hidden driver of what many researchers now call type 3 diabetes. And we talked about what you can actually do about all of it, starting today. My goal was never to scare you. I want to be clear about that. My goal, in this video, in every conversation I have about brain health, is to give you the tools to fight back. Because you deserve to fight back. You deserve to know what the science says. You deserve to make informed choices about the most precious organ in your body. The research gives us real reason for optimism. Studies make clear that even incremental improvements in dietary quality can begin to alter the brain's aging trajectory. The biology is on your side if you give it the chance to work. Your mind isn't just an organ. It's everything you are. It's every memory you've built. It's every relationship you've carried. It's every piece of your story that you've worked a lifetime to write. And it is worth protecting. If this video gave you something valuable today, something you're going to think about, something you're going to act on, share it. Send it to someone you love, a parent, a sibling, a friend who's been complaining about memory. This conversation is worth having. And if you want more of it, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Because what's coming next is just as important as what we covered today. And drop a comment below. I read every single one of them. Tell me, which of these 5 foods surprised you most? Which one are you going to tackle first? Thank you for spending part of your day on something that truly matters. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.